Hello everyone, welcome to the final list for 2024. And in this one, I'm finally gonna talk about my 50 favorite albums of 2024. 2024 was a pretty interesting year for music in my opinion. There are 50 albums over here that I do recommend, and this is also a list where I try to avoid including archivals, live albums or soundtracks. But with that being said, let's get straight into it because we have a lot to talk about. At number 50 is Walker and Royce with No Big Deal. While it's true that this album is not something to get excited about, as it offers a pretty standard formula of dance music, when it hits hard, with some awesome addictive banging tracks that keep the essence of what dance music needs and is all about. After teasing a bit portion of the project with 2 EPs of the same name prior to the release of the album, the duo makes a really fun and catchy tech house album with lots of highlights to it, and it's guaranteed to make you dance if you're in the mood for an album like this. Number 49 is Full of Hell with Conjugated Bliss. I wouldn't consider this to be one of my favorite works they've put out after a big series of versatile albums, but it's still really awesome to see the band experiment even further and be always full of surprises. On the surface, Conjugated Bliss might feel like their average take on grindcore, but this one focuses less on industrial and noise chaos and instead offers a more pristine and more carefully crafted experience, even with glimpses of mathcore and noise rock. If anything, it's further proof that their creativity knows no bounds, still finding ways to extend their formula on something new and refreshing. Another heavy and punchy album from one of the most intriguing names in extreme metal music in recent memory. Number 48 is Prurient with Destroyed Electricity. Prurient made a ton of different releases in 2024, with most of them using harsh noise and power electronics as laid-back background elements instead of being upfront and in your face and having a bigger emphasis on atmosphere and ambience. While I think it resulted to more quantity over quality, out of everything I've heard, Destroyed Electricity is the most standout work. Even if I don't consider this to be this strong as a whole thing, there are certain specific moments that are absolutely breathtaking and show Prurient's ability to build up a bleak and hopeless atmosphere with noise and industrial. Not one of the most essential in his catalog in my opinion, but fans of Prurient should check this out, especially for tracks like Return to Necrophilia and Smoky Bridge Between Men and Boys. Number 47 is the new album of Ulcerate, Cutting the Throat of God. I remember from back in the day not really being able to find the appeal of this new wave of dissonant death metal, and case in point was the previous album of Ulcerate for me, Stare Into Death and Be Still. So I got really surprised with how much I ended up enjoying Cutting the Throat of God. Awesome production where it doesn't feel like a chaotic mess, but instead everything sounds so pristine. The drumming is absolutely insane, the technical parts have depth to them and feel polished, and the ominous atmosphere from those guitar riffs is on point. The basic might not always do it for me, but in terms of performances and production, this is an immaculate technical death metal release. Number 46 is Adrian Lenker with Bright Future. Being really outside of my comfort zone and what I'm used to listen to, it was a quite pleasant surprise to see myself enjoy this album as much as I did. But singer-songwriter Adrian Lenker manages to create an emotionally captivating fall album reflective of the singer's abilities in powerful storytelling and subtle melodies. Quite a sentimental and personal album in which I can definitely see the hype behind it and why it is considered an important release for this year. Beautiful instrumentation with piano, acoustic guitar and classical parts, and also some quite strong vocal deliveries achieve on setting this apart from a lot of albums that come out in the folk scene. Number 45 is Bird's Eye by Révin Lene. After a series of very promising releases, the second full-length album of Révin Lene is one of the better examples of neo-soul and R&B that I've heard in recent years. Without really doing anything that reinvents the wheel, but with a poppy and more mellow side this time around, the instrumentals are really smooth and capture a lot of the elements that the genres need in order to be appealing, with an eclectic set of different approaches. The soulful sentimental vocals and the chill R&B instrumentals make for another project from Révin Lene that I ended up enjoying much more than I would anticipate. Number 44 I have Justice with Hyperdrama. Even if the song Generator baited listeners for a more popped up synthwave sound compared to what we got, there's still a lot of interesting highlights that make Hyperdrama what is considered for most a return to form for the French electro duo. with 2 really cool tracks featuring Tame Impala, and also Explorer, which I didn't expect to be that much obsessed with. From nu disco to synth funk, Justice throws a party that is a return to the 80s and it sounds really cool and awesome. Even if I'm not that familiar with past Justice releases, this is quite good for what it wants to achieve in terms of atmosphere and vibes. Number 43, let's drop a Greek release to the mix with Mnima and Kataramena Lipsana. With 4 tracks that are a bit over 10 minutes each, the Greek black noise project still delivers with some insanely raw and filthy black metal, making this one of the most standout releases Mnima has ever put out. Alongside some of the best riffs they've written, the sheer intensity of the drums and the vocals, this ridiculous lo-fi production is simply unmatched. It might feel too much for some of you, but still it's not over the top in-your-face noise compared to past works. Still, might feel a bit too noisy to some of you, but I would say that this is arguably one of the greatest and most sinister black metal releases I've heard all year. Number 42 is Like Weeds with Self-Sabotage. With a pretty short release that is only 30 minutes long, Like Weeds manages once again in this short period of time to stand out in the myriad of different noise artists out there and create another sonically outstanding set of noise and industrial music. Even if it's not one of his greatest and most consistent works, at its best this is an intense and furious selection of sounds that is unforgiving and unsettling. Even having moments of power noise and dark ambient, this album is an anxiety-inducing trip that doesn't hold back. Not what I would consider the strongest introduction point to Like Weeds, but a strong recommendation regardless for anyone who is looking for an intriguing and one-of-a-kind noise release out of 2024. Number 41 is Chelsea Wolfe with She Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She. Chelsea Wolfe's return to this dark and gothic post-industrial sound marks another strong moment for the singer and songwriter's career, with a really strong beginning that might not reach the same amount of greatness on the album's second half, but still, Chelsea Wolfe's ability to bring so much passion and emotion with her stellar and majestic voice in this set of dark electronic songs is a nocturnal and ethereal experience that doesn't happen quite often. One of the better works I've heard from her, and one of a kind album out of the year that is worth checking out. Number 40 is Scathing with Clipping Wings of Grief. One of those releases out of this list that you're probably the least familiar with, and even I had no idea what to expect getting into this. But Flag Day Recordings is a cool label when it comes to discovering some experimental noise and ambient releases, and this one didn't disappoint. This is a sonically stellar noise album that also plays a lot with elements of music concrete and field recordings, especially in the final almost 20-minute cut that is structured in a really solid way. If you're looking forward to an eccentric harsh noise release with great textures and lots of experimental features to keep you engaged, look no further than this hidden gem. Number 39 is Yeet with 2093. Talk about pleasant surprises. Yeet has been just another artist for me that jumped on the whole Rage bandwagon, made a couple of good songs, but in terms of whole albums, as per usual, the results would be bloated and inconsistent. And while these issues are still present in a 22-track, 70-minute album, this change up of direction with futuristic electronic industrial beats made for a very welcome change and some really interesting results. Cohesive with its approach and directions, 2093 is definitely one of those albums I didn't expect to be impressed by as much as I did. A huge step up from anything else he's put out, finding his footing on a polished set of instrumentals with vocals and rapping that feels appropriate for the majority of tracks included here. I hope that Yeet or other artists will experiment with more out there and diverse music and take the risk to release something bold and unexpected. 2093 is a massive leap and leads to one of the most intriguing hip-hop releases this year. Number 38, it's this band which I can't pronounce with the album T. I've always been in a bizarre position when it comes to this industrial techno duo. On one hand, I see strong potential with the way they experiment with many different elements of electronic music, but there have been times where the overall execution feels underwhelming. From everything I've heard out of the duo so far, this might be the best project they've put out. It seems like they have combined all of the elements from various eras of previous albums and mixed them together in a very special and intriguing electronic release. What I have to say for sure is that this is one of the most well-produced albums I've heard this year. Like, the sound choices are absolutely spectacular. Fortunately, for a decent portion of this album, it also leads to some thoughtful and well put together body of works rather than just experimentations being thrown together. Really solid electronic release with experimental, industrial and ambient elements. Really pleased with this one. Number 37 is Blue Hawaii with Diamond Shovel. After a label change and a huge delay, the new album of Blue Hawaii abandons their formula of deep house and makes a U-turn with heavily energetic Eurodance and trance and lots of awesome modern techniques to elevate their sound. With heavy vocal manipulations, uplifting melodies, fast-paced dance beats, the album exceeded my expectations and had a lot of interesting intense moments. Outside of a few calmer parts that were really forgettable in my opinion, this change of sound and direction worked in an extraordinary way and makes for a really cool electronic release out of this year. Number 36 is Sutcliffe No More with the album Cute. The spiritual successor of Sutcliffe Jurgens and Slaves No More shows the duo of Kevin Tompkins and Paul Taylor to still be able to create some of the most notorious and filthiest power electronics to exist out there. With the inclusions of all the styles that we see reappearing in the more recent outputs such as Death Industrial, Drone and Spoken Word filled with anger and shocking storytelling, this 66-minute mayhem of an album starts off on a strong note with Salt, and after a series of pretty interesting and diverse ideas, it demolishes everything with the bleak and depressing noise drone onslaught that is the relentless 24-minute self-titled cut towards the end. A track so strong that makes the entire album go up a few positions. Another consistently solid, anxious and devastating work from two of the greats in the scene for decades at this point. Number 35 is Lady Blackbird with Slang Spirituals. Undoubtedly one of my biggest growers this year. At first I was immediately captivated by this superb album cover, and then when I got hit by these grandiose soulful parts, I was astonished. But the album is pretty inconsistent at times in terms of mood, and some of the more minimal and soothing cuts didn't do it for me. But the more dynamic moments, and the ones that showed some strong marks of versatility and variety, ended up becoming even better the more I would listen to them. Not a landmark in soul music by any means, but it's still a very creative and imaginative album with its multiple stylistic approaches, and it contains without a doubt some of the strongest and most striking female vocal performances I've heard all year. Number 34 is Godspeed You Black Emperor with their new untitled album. The great thing about Godspeed You Black Emperor is how many things they can say without having any lyrics. Another captivating and heavy instrumental masterclass from some of the greats in post-rock. This album with no title reflects one of the most tragic wars and genocidal massacres that takes place in recent memory to this day. The music speaks for itself. It's very powerful and cinematic, great balance of soothing, bleak instrumentation leading to bombastic and anthemic walls of noise, a great balance from minimalism to sheer chaos. And considering that the previous two albums were slightly disappointing in my opinion, this is not just a step up. I would consider this to be one of my favorite Godspeed You Black Emperor albums. It's unfortunate that it has to be done under the circumstances of a horrific war taking place, but this simply reinforces the powerful political standpoint that the group has kept alive for all of those years. Really beautiful album. Number 33 is Susu with 13-inch Frank Beltrame Italian stiletto with bison horn grips. With a return to a more rock-oriented sound that feels a bit like more old-school Susu, this is one of the better studio full-length albums they've put out in a while, still pushing the boundaries with an experimental approach to psychedelic rock that stays true to their identity as one of those projects that always manages to experiment and attempt new things. The new album right here has a refreshing tone with the way it approaches neo-psychedelia and industrial rock, another creative and imaginative album that even if it's not one of my favorites they've put out as a whole thing, there are some really notable highlights that shine throughout everything they've put out so far. Number 32 is Thou with Umbilical. After a series of multiple albums and EPs that were disappointing for me, Thou was one of those bands in which I wasn't able to see the appeal, but with Umbilical I was really surprised, as this is by far the best album I've heard out of them. Instead of being another average sludge metal album, Thou brings the heat with more doom elements and also more fast-paced ideas. but there is also a great cohesion of every track coming together and without being all over the place or trying something wild and different. Instead, this might be one of the more accessible works, and it pays off with some sick, catchy riffs and some intense, punchy performances. The sound is still really heavy and aggressive, but for me, it's the first time I see this band pull it off with such polished results, especially with a sick 3-part finisher. Really pleased with how much I ended up liking this. Number 31 is Spectral Wound with Songs of Blood and Mire. With another more well produced and accessible black metal album, Spectral Wound pulls it off once again after the awesome and diabolic Thirst with another set of polished and epic melodic black metal tracks, filled with insane blast beats and some spectacular riffs that can get stuck in your head. The Canadian black metal group makes another album that I consider one of the most solid the genre has to offer, even if it's a really straightforward approach with nothing unique or original on what it does, but at least it does it really good. The ideas are there and they sound absolutely incredible. Number 30 is Melt Banana with 3+5. 9 years after the release of one of their most standout works, Fetch, this enigmatic duo makes a comeback to rock your socks off with one of the wackiest and most bizarre rock and punk albums you'll hear all year. With a huge usage of glitchy electronic parts in just 24 minutes of material, we get 9 chaotic and experimental tracks filled with eccentric vocal deliveries, insanely energetic and technical parts, and in general, it's just a blast to listen to. They are still full of surprises after all those years, they never cease to amaze me with their out there and quirky approach to rock and punk. Number 29 is Oplitis with Paramenomeni. In just 2023, this one-man Chinese band blew everyone's minds with 3 albums in just 1 year back to back with some of the most ferocious technical black metal out there. I had my complaints with the mostly mechanical sound, especially with the drums, but I have to agree that the arrangements and structures were quite impressive. The album in 2024 though is the most impressive of them all, the most cohesive and best sounding work so far with insane technical parts. It's the superb progressive black metal album with mathcore and avant-garde elements and solid inclusions of saxophone and synthesizers in certain parts. One of the more outlandish metal albums to come out this year. It's overwhelming to digest as it's non-stop crazy technical structures, but the overall instrumentation and the way it all blends together makes for a rewarding experience. Number 28 is VR Sex with Hard Copy. Going further and further away from dark wave and fully embracing death rock and gothic rock with Hard Copy, this is an album that impressed me more than I expected, even if I wasn't all that familiar with their past albums. Very loud and in your face with its striking raw production and noisy guitars filled with catchy and energetic tunes, one of those albums that became growers on me and ended up appreciating even more with additional listens. Addictive and intense from start to finish with a lot of notable highlights to it. Number 27 is the new album of End, When Stars Collide. After the stellar album Social Decay a couple years ago, I got into this with high expectations, and especially since it was about to be released from Instruments of Discipline, a great label when it comes to finding extreme underground electronic music. When Stars Collide is a minimal power noise album with an old school approach with some of its breaks and instrumentation. There is a constant dark spacey vibe throughout the whole project, glitch and mechanical production that toys with industrial, and there is this nice contrast of familiar breaks with futuristic soundscapes. One of the best albums on this list in terms of production and sound design, and definitely one of my strongest recommendations for some intense and powerful electronic music. Number 26 is Geotic with The Anchorite. Prior to this, I knew of Geotic as a pretty decent name in microhouse and chill electronic music, and the ambient approach of The Anchorite is not a surprise for me, but doing it with loops of mellow lo-fi folk parts for the entirety of the album is not what I was expecting. It basically feels like introductions to post-rock songs. They don't lead anywhere, but they are cozy, minimal tracks that sound absolutely gorgeous. With the exception of the distorted The Lime of Stars, which is one of the album's greatest moments, everything else is these melancholic, calm pieces of minimal instrumentation that feels a bit glitchy, a bit mechanical, and it makes for an album that I wasn't expecting from Geotic. But this is by far his most captivating work, absolutely gorgeous and unique in its approach on piecing its ideas together. Strongly recommend. Number 25, halfway towards the list, is gonna be a crazy one. It's Nicholas Jar with Archivos de Radio Piedras. With another album reflecting on the recent genocides, Nicholas Jar makes his most ambitious and most challenging work to date. In its entirety, this album is about 5 hours and 45 minutes long. It's a humongous piece of 49 tracks consisting of 2 parts. The first section is the Archivos de Radio Piedra series with 17 very lengthy tracks that consist of radio talk in Spanish and Arabic and is filled with a sense of bleakness and some immaculate sound art and sound collage, and all of those are for free on Bandcamp. The second part is where it contains the actual tracks meant for the album, in which you can hear snippets of them playing in the previous radio broadcast transmissions, but there you get the full picture, and this is the part that was later separated in 2 albums released on streaming platforms. These tracks range from so many different styles of experimental electronic music with elements of Latin electronic, art pop, and many more. Such a varied and artistic work that is also political and empowering. Some of the most creative ideas I've heard from Nicholas Jar in an album that is hard to get into due to its length, but it's really rewarding. Number 24 is gonna be Departure Chandelier with their second album, Satan Soldier of Fortune. After a really well done debut, the follow-up of Departure Chandelier keeps up with this spectacular raw approach on black metal, with gorgeous triumphant riffs and an even bigger emphasis on the synths, which makes for some astonishing inclusions of creating this epic atmosphere, with even some of its greatest moments being the dungeon synth ideas. Satan Soldier of Fortune is a great continuation of what made their debut so powerful. Lo-fi as fuck, noisy guitars, ferocious vocals and magnificent synths. If you're looking for something similar to Burzum in terms of melodic raw black metal, Departure Chandelier delivers once again. Number 23 is this album which I cannot pronounce, of Ozerom. Discovering and giving a chance to multiple Ozerom releases that came out this year has been a blast, because right here we're talking about some of the most soothing and captivating ambient and drone releases that I've heard in a while, with 5 minimalistic and sober pieces of piano and sine waves that is only about 30 minutes long. It is enough to immerse you in its sublime and charming atmosphere. Not a lot more needing to be added about this. Give it a listen if you want to listen to a relaxing ambient album that is straightforward and gets the job done, especially with the final track. What a gorgeous, simple idea. Number 22 is gonna be Rum and Coke by Sit and Shine. With another work from Sit and Shine on Riot Season, this is one of those albums that goes into the direction of lo-fi, over-the-top noise rock with a wacky sense of humor from the sampling to the vocals and a heavy sound that even goes to sludge metal territory at times. Another oddball for this experimental rock project that doesn't fail to amaze me for being so out there and outlandish with its messy production, the weird glitchy parts, the experimental structures, not the easiest to digest due to how ridiculous it can be at times, but for me it's another work in their catalog that showcases Sit and Shine's creativity and versatility throughout the years. Number 21 is Eddie Dark with Disco Terrorista. I'm in a conflicted position with this album because on one hand it has many elements that I absolutely adore. However, I think that certain tracks get ruined by over-the-top vocal inflections that are not as fitting, but when the album hits, it hits really hard. Over the years, Eddie Dark has managed to make a big name for himself in the underground Greek electronic music scene, so much so that his new album is released by Inner Ear, one of the bigger labels in the Greek scene at the moment. The nice thing is that Eddie Dark still keeps the elements that make his sound appealing. Instead of a departure into a more accessible sound, this is another really minimal lo-fi and raw take on darkwave and synthpop that is executed in an impeccable way when it comes to instrumentals. Tracks like the self-titled Disco Terrorista and Φλέβες στο λαιμό σου are just immaculate, while others such as Τα πτώματα δεν ερωτεύονται and Άγγελος σε τεκνόπαρτο could benefit more by less ridiculous and humorous vocal deliveries that may become obnoxious to some of you, but for the most part this is a short and straightforward album that is really effective on keeping the essence of the Greek underground scene. Number 20, it's an obvious one, it's Brat by Charli XCX. Brat is not simply an album, but a whole cultural phenomenon. Seeing this amount of popularity and reception is almost surreal, but I can't think of a more deserving album in the pop industry at the moment worth of its praise. After pushing the envelope of pop music alongside amazing and cutting-edge producers for years, Brad goes into a less experimental direction by the likes of hyperpop, like with How I'm Feeling Now, but this is still a refreshing take on futuristic dance pop music. And while I find this another album that is not cohesive from start to finish, Brad definitely contains some of the most impressive and addictive dance anthems she has ever done. Tracks like Von Dutch, B2B, and the bonus Brick Breakers are amongst the best tracks in Charlie's entire career, while the emotional So I about Sophie's passing and Girl So Confusing alongside this insane remix with Lorde have become growers that set this album to an even higher and special spot for me. From its marketing, the visuals, the teasers, the album cover choices, Charlie set the bar really high with what is undoubtedly one of the most impressive and forward-thinking dance and pop albums to hit the mainstream. Number 19 is Cyclops with Black Eye. With one of the most creative and imaginative house albums to come out this year, Cyclops returns with another set of minimal beats, glitchy sounds and crazy additional percussion work. Bordering to IDM territory, this eccentric and experimental electronic release is guaranteed to leave an impression on you, with its quirky attitude, bizarre use of sampling and one-of-a-kind sound choices. One of those electronic and dance releases that is not really talked about. In my opinion, it's worth to be brought more attention, alongside with her past works that are also really solid. Number 18 is Splendor Geometrico with Strepitus Rhythmicus. Being one of the pioneering groups in power noise and industrial, they're still able, after decades, to deliver with some of the most creative and well put together industrial albums you're going to listen to all year, with some really imaginative use of constant sampling that is added to a series of chaotic and abstract beats. Strepitus Rhythmicus is this fine line between rhythm and experimentation, as it feels like a massive sound collage with all of its pieces fitting together in a strange way. Definitely one of my strongest recommendations if you're looking for an industrial electronic release with a ton of bizarre and refreshing ideas to keep you engaged from start to finish. Number 17 is Nails with Every Bridge Burning. Once again, Nails are able to break the heat with another short album that is only 17 minutes that manages to be just absolutely relentless and furious from start to finish. The grindcore group, blending even further elements of metalcore into the mix, creates some of the strongest outputs with their fourth full-length studio album. Non-stop intensity, aggressive with awesome production and sick performances, Nails make a really consistent, ruthless album that puts them once again to the spot as one of the greatest names in extreme metal and grindcore in recent memory. What a blast of an album. At number 16 is Sissy Spacek with Bolero Shield. Getting from a really short album to one of the longest in this list, Bolero Shield is a magnificent but also really challenging album to get into for a multitude of reasons. John Weiss keeps on making these outstanding sound collages that has made his most recent work shine, but now alongside the extreme noisy sound of Sissy Spacek, the results are this avant-garde and chaotic harsh noise and noisecore project that leaves you no room to breathe for its 1 hour and 47-minute runtime, with crazy improvised parts, music on crate, constant glitch and abrasive noise. This album has a lot to digest, but for me, sitting through all of this was absolutely rewarding, and it makes itself as one of the highlights and wildest releases that Sissy Spacek have put out over the years. Number 15 is Catherine Greentorch with Songs for the Dead. After being immersed by her EP with Iggy Pop, her solo work over here alongside lots of artists from different musical backgrounds made for one of the most captivating experiences I had with an album all year. An interesting conceptual album that ties poetry with dark, haunting and hypnotic classical instrumentation. At times blissful and calm, and on other times suspenseful, this is a really one-of-a-kind minimal and atmospheric modern classical release that will keep you engaged with its vast array of sound directions from start to finish. A really beautiful but also dark album that is really well made. Number 14 is Gliss with Gateway to Oblivion. It's nice to remind yourself once in a while of those directions of electronic music that have this sense of nostalgia. For me, Agrotech and DBM were some of the main genres to get me hooked into electronic music throughout my adolescence. And while this style seems to be dead outside of certain die-hard communities, here is Glitch with an EDM sound that is extraordinary and one of those hidden gems that I'm so glad I gave it a shot. There is nothing particularly unique or special about this album, but we're also not talking about an over-the-top edgy cybergoth album. It's a bit more toned down that fans of old school EDM can appreciate as well. It's just a really well-crafted album with lots of standout moments, and yeah, that's really all it needs. Number 13 is Fontaine's DC with Romance. This was my introduction to Fontaine's DC, and I was really impressed by how much I ended up liking this album. Apparently this is quite different compared to their previous works, but I really cannot think of a lot of albums, especially more recent ones in terms of alternative rock, that have been able to keep me hooked up with so many awesome melodic and catchy tracks. A bold change of direction for the band that pays off with an eclectic album that is filled with so many different ideas that make this whole thing flow nicely for its short runtime. Really pleasant surprise for me. Number 12 is Igloo Ghost with Tidal Memory EXO. After a series of albums and EPs that seem to be way too overwhelming with how much stuff they'll throw to the listener, here is Tidal Memory EXO that blows everything out of the park with its consistent reoccurring sounds and odd vocal deliveries that reoccur in different fashion and styles of electronic music and lead to this cohesive and well-structured album that flows smoothly from one track to the next. In terms of production, this is undoubtedly one of the best sounding albums on this list. Just absolutely incredible beats and electronics with a darker and more aggressive approach compared to the bubblegum bass sound that Igloo Ghost was mostly known for. But this change of mood works in an extraordinary fashion with a deconstructed club and experimental hip-hop album that is really special in its own way. Number 11 is the self-titled Sophie. Sophie's influence for the future of pop and electronic music was simply unmatched. Years after her tragic passing, a posthumous album is announced produced by her brother Benny Long, what was supposed to be her next album that she was close to finishing, and her brother made the best possible work to bring those ideas to life as a whole thing. I was really excited about it, and while it might not be the groundbreaking work that was her past two albums, the popper approach is still done in a magnificent way over here. To my huge surprise, this album got a lot of negative reception, which I struggled to see why. Sophie was not a stranger to popper approaches considering some of her production credits in the past, and even if it feels like a more safe approach, there are still some crazy experimental and out there parts. Maybe the bar was set too high, and even if you don't really get those tracks to their full fruition, which you can tell from the way certain parts loop themselves around, the ideas are still present, most of them are spectacular and breathtaking, and at the end of the day, that's all that really matters to me. The multiple features bring life to those ideas, and the multiple change-ups from deconstructed club to dance pop to moody ambient tracks still offer those signature sounds that feel like I'm listening to a Sophie album. I'm glad that this exists, and that we got to listen to those final ideas of Sophie even at this rate. Such a gorgeous album in my opinion. And now we're at the top 10, and at number 10 we have another album of Ozerom, Cut Paper Flowers. Yes, another work from Ozerom lands on this list. Like I said, this year, discovering Ozerom releases has been a spectacular find, and out of all of them, Cut Paper Flowers has been my personal favorite. 4 outstanding dreamy minimal tracks with ambient and drone passages, such a gorgeous usage of sine waves that evokes a feeling of coziness while the dark undertones are still present. This is an absolute stellar and magnificent album that all fans of ambient should give it a shot, as Cut Paper Flowers is one of the most stunning, relaxing ambient projects I've heard all decade so far. It is that good. Number 9 is Greasy Dazeo with Accelero. One of those albums that is kinda hard to describe because of how many things happen at the same time. This is a wild combination of sounds and genres that showcases an approach to Brazilian funk that is unlike anything I've ever heard before. Being also a more serious album with political lyricism, Accelero is an insanely varied album that combines Brazilian funk with industrial, deconstructed club, glitch, and African-style percussion, just to name a few, pushing the genre beyond its limits. From this rapidly emerging wave of Brazilian artists, Greasy Dazeo certainly offers something unique and refreshing, and it also sounds really awesome, one of the wildest albums I discovered this year. Number 8 is KKNL with Ghost Dub Awakening. It's hard to keep up with anything KKNL does because it's a lot, but having a work on No Rent Records intrigued me and it seemed like a good chance to give one of his new albums a shot. And my god, I was not expecting this. The Japanese noise artist decides to make a heavily experimental short album with drum loops that get constantly manipulated, glitched out, and at times hit you with intense explosions of noise. It gets all over the place, it is unhinged at times, kind of hard to wrap my head around it all, and I absolutely love it for that. It's just a constant sonic assault. The moment where it feels like the beats start to make any sense, it would just hit you with a curveball. It's super unpredictable and kinda reminds me of something Muslim gods would do in terms of dub beat manipulation, but this is more futuristic and even more all over the place. Can't guarantee that you will enjoy this, but I had a blast with how Atlantis it felt. At number 7 is Ska with The Thief Next to Jesus. This was a rapper I was aware of for a while, but this was my introduction unfortunately after I found out about his passing, and this hits different. While I've never been that much into this wave of abstract hip hop and drumless, I might go as far as to say that this is the best album I've heard in the genre. The sampling loops are bone-chilling, Ka's delivery feels special, it's personal and vulnerable, and I even gave a shot to some other Ka albums, but this is the one that does it for me. The Thief Next to Jesus is a testament to storytelling and genius sample usage. Absolutely astonished by how raw and dark this feels for a rap album. Number 6, we have Surge by Consumer Electronics. After a long series of albums with a ton of potential whose execution left a lot to be desired in my opinion, Surge is exactly what I wanted to listen from them after all this time. A combination of minimal beats with spoken word that is raw, without sounding too flat or unengaging, a disturbing and unsettling atmosphere that lurks through every noise pattern, every spoken word part, with its shockingly detailed and uncomfortable narrative. I made an entire video about this album that I suggest you to go and check out, as I truly consider this one of the most outstanding and most special power electronics releases to come out in recent memory. By far my favorite from them, and a direction I hope that we'll see fleshed out even further in the future. Number 5 is Gnod with Spotland. I've been familiar with a couple of works from Gnod, with some of them that I consider to be pretty decent, but getting into Spotland, I did not expect that I would end up discovering one of the most superb and exceptional psychedelic rock albums out of this decade. With drone and space rock into the mix, this immaculate 5-track album is an absolute trip from start to finish. Minimal and straightforward in its execution, and with each track having its own thing to offer. From ethereal chants to weird krautrock passages and ambient sections, this album was beyond impressive for me. I got into this not expecting much, and now is by far the best thing out of everything I've heard from Gnod. Number 4 is Mulata Astatke with Hudna Orchestra with the album Tension. Probably the most legendary Ethiopian jazz musician teams up with the Afrobeat Hudna Orchestra to create the most outstanding jazz release of this year. Mulata Astatke has quite a few classics out of his belt, and I strongly consider that this should become one of them. With simple structures and melodic parts that can easily get stuck in your head, a really relaxing and soothing jazz experience with captivating performances, a rich sound, and just some beautiful chill beats overall, especially with the first 3 tracks. Absolutely essential in my opinion, strongly recommend this. Number 3 is Son of Nothing with the album Maze. With her previous album The Guilt of Feeling Alive being one of my favorite post-black and atmospheric sludge metal releases of the past decade, the Greek band's comeback album Maze, 14 years later, is exactly what I wanted. Still keeping up strong with some of the most well-crafted metal songs out there, heavy, dark and emotional, with even greater emphasis on some really strong vocal deliveries. Maze has all the package that has made their previous work so stellar, and after all this time, the comeback does not disappoint. In fact, this is one of the most powerful and astonishing metal releases I've heard this past couple of years, easily. Number 2 is Orange Pazuzu with Muntao Toza, or however this is pronounced. Few bands have been able to consistently reinvent the wheel for black metal the way Orange Pazuzu do. the Finnish psychedelic avant-garde black metal group have done quite a few interesting releases, but if we count out their side on the split with Candy Cane, this is by far the best project they have ever put out. With a much more electrified and industrial approach, this has already become one of the most special and one-of-a-kind releases in extreme metal that I can think of. Ranging from noisy textures to ominous spacey passages, this album feels so refreshing, and every one of its experimentations and out there songwriting works in a tremendous fashion. Absolutely surreal and psychedelic, a combination of the worlds of electronic and metal music that is simply mind-blowing. And finally, here it is. The album that lands on the number 1 spot this year is gonna be Pharmakon with Maggot Mass. One of the most well-known names in the modern power electronic scene, Margaret Chardiet returns with her 5th album as Pharmakon, one of the most sickening and brutal works that also achieves to be her most accessible. Another short and straightforward power electronics album that is pure filth with minimal industrial beats and outstanding sound design. Interestingly enough, this is her most melodic work and also the one where we see Pharmakon elevate her vocal range with a few singing parts. It's this incredible balance of raw and unfiltered but also carefully crafted, a sense of familiarity but with a couple new ideas to keep things a bit refreshing, with a striking concept as well about the relationship of humans with nature and the environment. Maggot Mass has this extra edge that elevates her sound and leads to one of her greatest works, if not her best. This is power electronics and death industrial at its finest, and Pharmakon does it once again. And this is it. This is what I consider to be the 50 greatest albums out of 2024 that I've heard. What were your favorite albums out of this year? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.